If a stranger in a coffee shop asked you, "When has God shown up in your life?" you might find the question a little odd. But if you paused, chances are you'd have a story to tell. At St. Mark's, we believe God is at work everywhere, and everyone has a God encounter story. Inspired by StoryCorps, this Lent we're introducing GodCorps, an opportunity to record a short interview and share an experience of God at work in your life. We'd love to hear your story.
We are back for round 2.
Yay.
That's right. No, Mary, again, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story and how God has been working in you and in others through you, through your adoption. And I think that you are doing wonderful things with starting the Bible study group. So let's get to it. When did your adoption story start?
That's a great question. Kind of similar. Well, there's so many similarities, actually, I think, between our stories. I would say it started before I was born. So my parents are actually from here, Illinois, rural, central Illinois, and they could not have children for 14 years. So they had prayed for a very long time. They kind of just thought, okay, maybe it's not God's will for us to have biological children. They had worked through that on their own. And in the process of those many years, they became missionaries in South Asia. Around that time, they'd still kind of been thinking through, maybe adoption is where God has our story. So they had considered adoption at least once or twice with 2 other children. And those are quite interesting stories in themselves. I'll just say that they both fell through, sadly. And so again, it had been about 14 years by the time I was born. And so the way that they learned about me essentially was that they had some friends, missions-based medical providers who were working out in rural Nepal. And one of them was a nurse in a hospital who knew that a baby had just been born. That would have been me. And my birth mother sadly died in childbirth. So what should have been a very routine procedure, just with the medical, what they did have at that time, they lacked in a lot of other ways, just being out in a rural area, not having a lot of technological advances that the West has. And unfortunately, she passed during a C-section procedure. So that nurse actually knew my parents had been looking to adopt and did reach out to them and let them know. So while my parents were working through all of those logistics and those next steps, I lived in that village for 2 weeks, cared for by like a very local community of older women who, I did have a birth father who had 2 other children. But again, just with the dynamics of poverty and being, out in a very remote area, I just did not feel like he had the resources to care for another child. So he had talked with the medical team there, and he had talked with the hospital and had said, yes, if you can find another family, then I will give up my parental rights. And that is basically what happened. So again, 2 weeks after I was born, my parents flew out, picked me up, and I went back to live with them. But I was not adopted for another 4 months. The dynamics of that country, I'll just say it's Nepal, it's had a long history of difficulties when it comes to adoption. Just legally, there's a lot of corruption. There was a period of time where, a few times actually, where they've kind of shut it down and said, hey, we can't have foreign countries adopting just because it's been so riddled with, bribes, or not sure if the kids are really being taken care of, things like that. And so it was just a long, arduous process that took about 4 months, but I was eventually adopted.
Wow.
A lot of people were praying for that. So to go back to your original question, it really started before I was born. A lot of people praying, my parents praying, and yeah, it's kind of where it began.
That is incredible, Mary. Oh my gosh. What are some of the ways that you have seen God directly involved in your adoption story?
Yeah, I think the power of prayer is the first thing that comes to my mind. I know that my parents are, I love them so much, and to hear how just faithfully they prayed, not our will but yours, Lord, and to see him show up in times where there were, I think, a lot of disappointments and grief, as I know that you've shared as well. I think knowing that there were a lot of church families that my parents were connected to over the years that were praying for not just me before I was born, but also my sister. So it's another miraculous aspect of this. So after I was born and adopted, about 13 months later, my sister was born. She is a biological child of my parents. And so that in itself is just amazing. And I think we've talked about this, and I know you just mentioned this in your story as well, but to see how God writes our stories in such a way that connects people and pointing out the beauty of adoption.
Yes.
The fact that, you know, we don't have to be related by blood to have this kinship, to see how God himself is a father to all of us.
Absolutely.
Uses his own son to point out, you know, I've brought you into this family, and the way that he bestows love unconditionally. I think I glimpsed that firsthand through my own story, where my parents, very similar again to yours, were just so generous and compassionate in loving me so well, but not holding back from saying, yes, you're adopted, you are my child.
Yes.
And I think that in a lot of ways, not completely, but I think in a lot of ways did, you know, I think there's always a level of brokenness to any adoption story where maybe what God has intended has not happened through, you know, families that have broken apart or
Yes.
what have you, but then he brings beauty from that. But they didn't shy away from acknowledging, like, yeah, this is a sad thing. Like, my birth mother had died, and my birth father could not take care of me. I didn't have the means. And so instead of, you know, pushing that under the rug or dismissing it, I think being able to affirm that trauma or that difficulty just legitimized my story and made me feel like, oh, it's very valid to feel the way that I do at times, but then to feel the safety of their love in the midst of that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's incredible, Mary. Now, have you ever met your biological father?
I have not. I have not met him. I have not met my two older biological sisters. They were quite a bit older than me. I would say probably at least 8 to 10 years older than me.
Okay.
But it was interesting. So my family, as I said, were missionaries in Nepal. I actually grew up there until I was 17, and it was just an interesting experience living in a culture that I essentially had come from, to share an ethnicity with people around me, but then to have white parents and to be American by nationality. And so a lot of times I would wonder, you know, what would my life have looked like? I can almost guarantee I would not be a believer in Jesus. I likely would not have had the education that I was given. I might have even been married a long time ago and had children. And so I always wonder about my biological family, like, where are they at? You know, what did their lives look like? But I think if I had the opportunity, I would love to meet them. It just hasn't happened. So.
Wow. That's incredible. All right, perfect. We still have a little bit of time. Something else I wanted to ask you was, have you ever met other adopted people and shared your story with them, and how did it impact them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I have. It was actually really interesting growing up, again, in Nepal, where there were a lot of people coming from other countries, whether as missionaries or expats, government workers. A lot of them from foreign countries would also come to adopt children. So
Wow.
quite a few of my friends growing up, it was interesting to know that they were also adopted, that they also came from, you know, families that, you know, there was that story of brokenness and beauty, and they didn't look like their parents. So I had quite a few friends that, whether they were adopted from India or also Nepal, I had some adopted from other countries as well. I think that was awesome to be able to share those stories, and I think, again, normalizing, like, oh, we are a community in itself.
Absolutely.
We share something that goes much deeper than other people can realize. I think it was very hard at times as a young child to have to explain almost to both foreigners and locals why my parents looked different from me, and not always having the language at that time. And even still coming and living in America for so long, I think it has also been difficult at times to kind of navigate the racial elements of my story in a very, difficult part of our culture at times, where not everyone can understand what that means to not only love someone of another race, but to also, choose to adopt a child.
Right.
I know my parents had navigated some of that living in rural farmland, Illinois.
Oh my goodness.
So it meant a lot to have friends growing up who had those similar stories, and that we could just bond over that and just feel, again, like that sense of community. Yeah. Wow.
Oh, Mary, thank you once again for doing this with me. That is such an amazing story. Oh my goodness. I feel like it should be published somewhere. You could write a book about it.
Love getting to talk with you more and hear more of your story.
Aw, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of St. Mark's Episcopal Church, GodCore. If you would like to record one of these episodes and tell your story about how you've experienced God, please use the link in the notes to schedule your time. We look forward to hearing your story, and we hope that you continue to tune in to hear ours. Thank you, and God bless you.